Hello everyone, this is Pinkstar, and welcome back to It's Called a Podcast, Sweetheart, where we talk everything Zootopia. Unfortunately, on this episode, we're not gonna have Andy Lagopus joining us because he's away for a wedding when we record this episode. But we are still here to present you everything related to Zootopia as we usually do every month. Also, remember to check out our website, Zootopia News Network. Whatever piece of information we have about Zootopia regarding any new artwork, anything about a new story, or something regarding the official franchise, it's always going to be uploaded over there. So remember to check that out, and also visit our Patreon so you also can contribute to this beautiful project so we can bring in up new stuff for you guys. Remember to check out patreon.com/ZNN. Okay, so the news we have for you is that it has been recently announced that there are going to be some Zootopia short films that are going to be released in China. Because for those who don't know, one of the countries that love Zootopia is China. In general, Asia really has a huge love for this movie, but especially in China, that it really it broke records that a lot of people went to see the film when it was originally released in theaters. So it's going to be this amount of 4 Zootopia shorts that are going to be developed alongside Shanghai Fine Arts Studios. They're going to be called Zootopia Day and Night, and it has been stated that it's going to be coming up in November 2025. Almost at the close to the releasing of Zootopia 2. So for now, it's not stated if these shorts are going to be also released in other languages besides Mandarin. So hopefully we get to see also these shorts in our either in English, Spanish, French, and other languages that you guys also got to watch Zootopia. But it's really very good news that we're having more material, not only about the movie, but also shorts, perhaps kind of similar to Zootopia Plus, perhaps, but also because we're going to be seeing more of the characters, side characters that also are beloved by the fandom. Okay, moving on to the main topic of this episode. Well, it has been discussed between the fans about what other kinds of animals are in the Zootopia universe, because of course we know there are mammals, but there are other references that there could be the possibility of other animals to be existing here, like birds or reptiles. Reptiles have already been established that they're going to be appearing, thanks to what we saw in the teaser trailer, but also because we have the protagonist that is Gary the snake, that he's going to be appearing alongside Judy and Nick on Zootopia 2. But also another kind of mammal that it has been talked a lot between fans that perhaps they're also part of this universe because, well, we see there are rivers, there are oceans, there are beaches, and well, what about those animals that live in this ecosystem regarding water? And I'm referring to sea mammals. And well, this topic was kind of discussed in the article, in the interview that Andy had with Jared Bush, that you can check that out, the article on Zootopia News Network. We're going to be talking about sea mammals. And for this episode, we have a special guest who is going to be talking more about the specifics regarding sea mammals. And here we have SmilingDolphins.
Hello.
Nice to have you here, Dolphins.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, let's start with the topic. When you first started to think about this idea of that sea mammals could coexist on the Zootopia universe?
Honestly, probably first when I started writing my fan fictions, I immediately knew I wanted to implement aquatic mammals into the world of Zootopia that I was creating. Because obviously there's none really shown in the movie. Aquatic mammals specifically referring to more like dolphins and stuff. I mean, my favorite animal has always been a dolphin, so I just really had an interest in, putting these aquatic mammals and making them fit into specifically my fan fictions and that sort of thing without also breaking the entire world and still having it make sense logically and somewhat scientifically.
Okay, well, first of all, well, we know that even if it's a mammal, well, dolphins have fins. But how will they fit in this universe? Because, like, it's will be weird. Well, I will find it strange for an animal that it's already established that has fins to have like legs. Like, how will that work? They will only live in the water, or how will that work?
Yeah, well, when you're putting these mammals into the kind of the world of Zootopia, you can really do two options that comes along with it. If you're wanting to keep the flippers and not have any sort of bipedal aquatic mammals walking around, then you'll go with what I like to call the aquatic dolphin method. And this method is where any dolphins or aquatic mammals that you have, the first thing is they're going to retain their aquatic form. Their torpedo-like bodies, they're not going to have legs or any additional limbs than what they already have. They're going to have their two flippers and their tail. That means that when you do this, it automatically is going to restrict you to their mobility on land, because obviously they're not just going to be able to walk around. They're probably going to have to use some sort of specialized vehicles or technology to get them around, like imagine a water tank on wheels. That's probably the realistic way that they would be able to move around. I remember a while ago there was concept art for the movie where you could see some dolphins in the background. You could see a narwhal and an orca and a dolphin, and they're in this tube that's kind of just going along with all the other mammals. So that's also a possibility, but again, you would be really restricted in where you can get your aquatic mammals to go, because not every building in Zootopia is going to be able to have a water tube running through it, or it might, but we haven't seen that shown in the movie, so you would assume that that's not something that would be feasibly possible to implement or that has been implemented.
Do you think they're going to address that on the sequel?
I hope they do. I really hope they do. I mean, we've already seen some aquatic mammals being introduced in the sequel, like the walrus, seals, that sort of thing that we didn't really see in the movie. But seals, walruses, dolphins, seals and walruses are not quite the same as dolphins because they can go on land much easier than dolphins can. Dolphins can survive out of water and they can survive on land because they breathe air. However, the main issue is them drying out. They need their skin to stay moist and to stay hydrated. So dolphins, they don't have sweat glands. They have no sweat glands, which is the primary reason that they can't last on land for an extended amount of time.
Well, because from what I have remember seeing in series and on movies, well, there has not. Well, I don't remember ever seeing aquatic mammals. Well, in general, aquatic animals in adapt to another form that is not the form we know them as, or they kind of, well, for what I remember, that they incorporate their have similar movement as if they were like their fins, they were legs or arms, for instance. Like from what I remember, like perhaps this is a terrible example, but for instance, Shark Tale, the fish in the movie, they don't have legs per se, but they try to use their fins in certain situations as if they were legs or arms, because their fins have, for instance, their fins like upper fins. They some of them will have fingers. Well, some sort of fingers, if we remember that. I think so. But yes, and they will not wear shoes, for instance. In clothing, well, they will not record. They wouldn't wear clothing, but perhaps some type of accessories, because they will mainly just be kind of like how we see Gary on the teaser trailer. Like they don't wear anything at all.
Yeah, that's also a very viable option when it comes to it. At the same time, with dolphins and aquatic mammals like that, their flippers are more. When you have like fish and stuff like that, they're little flippers on the side of their bodies. They're more. I don't know how to describe it, but they're not like muscle. It's more of like a hinge just attached to a joint that you can kind of move around. Whereas with dolphin flippers, it's more actual muscle just being protruded outside of their body, which makes it harder to kind of, if you did want to turn it into arms and hands that you would use like in that movie, it just kind of makes it harder because of, in that movie, they had the fins kind of lengthened, which made sense in the terms of fish. But with dolphins, you can't really lengthen those fins without making it look really, really weird.
Yeah. Do you have any example of any sort of animated series or another film that has made some sort of reference of how can this work?
I can actually kind of think of one. I believe there were some dolphins in the Netflix TV series All Hail King Julian, and they weren't necessarily, they were, I mean, obviously all the animals in there are anthropomorphic, but yeah, they did kind of lengthen their flippers there, but it led to a very weird looking kind of style.
Okay.
So these were like the dolphins that they had in that movie or in that show, and you can see that they did lengthen their flippers, but if these are supposed to be bottlenose dolphins, which I'm not sure exactly what kind of dolphins they're supposed to be, but say they were supposed to be bottlenose, these are definitely not any sort of accurate proportions. The flippers, they function more like arms. They kind of have this T-Rex kind of look to them almost. They're too short to really do anything past the head. Yeah, you can see they're never really seen out of water either. They kind of stand upright like this in the water at all times. You can see that they just kind of they basically keep all their bodies. Their head kind of rotates. Obviously, real dolphins' heads aren't rotated like this at a 90-degree angle.
Yeah.
But you can see this is one way that you could kind of implement your dolphins in, but it could lead to issues with how they interact with obviously land animals, especially if your is focused more on land animals or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean they did something. They did something similar with Shark Tale, like the way that fish will move, like or how they are. Their backs are like straightened up and their heads like that. But it's kind of strange because there will be obviously certain scenes where they will swim around like normal fish will do, and then they have this form like see they were talking as if they were persons, and sometimes it will look kind of weird, like here in the with the dolphins that you're showing right now.
Yeah.
Because well, for in Disney, it's kind of like the closest Disney reference I can think of right now will be Finding Nemo, but even there, the in general the sea creatures look realistic enough.
Yeah, very realistic. Yeah, that's also another way you could do your sea creatures in a Zootopia kind of world, but I would only recommend that if you're focusing completely on your sea creatures, because once you start trying to have them go on land or anything like that, if you're using a Finding Nemo kind of style, you're going to run into issues, especially with how their biology works as sea creatures.
Yes, because I think the only biggest difference that the sea creatures in Finding Nemo have with their real life counterparts will be the eyes, because always Disney has always been characterized for having their characters having big and expressive eyes, and we see that on Finding Nemo and therefore Finding Dory. We see the characters have bigger eyes than normal fish would have, but because this is still like of course animated, but it has its sense of realism, and in Zootopia it works differently because we're in an anthropomorphic universe where
Absolutely.
where the mammals are portrayed like the reflection on our human society. So of course, mammals are going to be looking differently. Like we see them how they walk and everything. Like sometimes they will have some little traits that will resemble their real life counterparts, but of course, it's gonna work differently.
Yeah, and that's why my personal favorite method to use is more of an amphibious approach where the dolphin's biology has actually been altered to allow them to live both on land and water, albeit with some restrictions. Essentially, dolphins they do at least they gain legs, arms, hands, and feet. I do have a picture here of just an example. This is my personal character, and I mean you can kind of see here. You've got 4-fingered hands and 3-fingered feet, so it's not too human. You're not still really having like human 5-fingered hands in the universe, which is kind of a taboo when you're talking about anything Zootopia. You don't want to see a 5-fingered hand, obviously. But you see, they keep their tail, and then they grow these arms and legs. The tail kind of acts as a balance for them when they're on land, like most animals. It'll definitely be a sort of dragging tail. It would drag behind them, or they could hold it up. But additionally, you'd want to have stuff like webbed feet and webbed hands. That allows them to still be fast and agile in the water. They swim using both their tail, their legs, and their hands to move in water, and then obviously they can still use those legs on land.
Okay, have you really never seen something similar in any other type of multimedia project or anything?
Yeah, I will admit I don't see much like this. I've had people tell me that it's a little too human, but it's what I personally like to use for when I'm putting these creatures into my stories or into my worlds or anything like that. Just because I feel that it fits them in better with the whole kind of feel of Zootopia as just it's humans but animals, not quite humans obviously. Like they still have their animalistic instincts, but it's a play on humans. Um, you could argue that all of the mammals that are shown in the movie, they don't gain any extra limbs to become anthropomorphic, but at the same time, they had to have gone through some sort of evolutionary change to become bipedal, obviously. So to make your dolphins bipedal, they would have to grow limbs. So if you really want your dolphins to be a bipedal, you'll have to bypass that kind of idea of like they can't grow limbs, or either they can't grow limbs or they can. And if you want your dolphins to be bipedal, you obviously have to agree with the idea that whatever made these mammals to become bipedal doesn't restrict them from growing additional limbs to help them out with that.
Do you think that if they ever include more sea creatures in this universe, how will you think they will portray them? Do you really think they will portray them kind of like similar like what you are showing us here, or they will go with the route that try to be more realistic, like they're not gonna add legs, like it's gonna be just their normal fins as they are?
No, I believe that they'll definitely go for a more a realistic kind of approach. You can see in this image here, this was, like I mentioned earlier, there was concept art for aquatic mammals, and you can see you've got dolphins and narwhals and maybe an orca in the corner over here, and you can see they're wearing some sort of clothing or something like that, and they're traveling through this water tube. And if they were to implement it, I would assume that's probably how they're going to do it, just to keep things from getting too complicated.
Okay, well, what other kind of information or background have you been investigating to make up this possible theories, scenarios regarding sea mammals?
Well, obviously there's biology. That's kind of the main thing when it comes to talking about sea animals. But when you're trying to do world building, you don't just look at one aspect, you look at everything. So you also need to consider stuff like culture and government and economy that these sea creatures would have. You don't just want to slap some sea creatures in and then call it a day, because then your characters can feel a little not quite fleshed out, which for a movie like Zootopia, you you can slap them in because it's a one-shot movie. You don't really have to do that world building. But if you're going to be having like a story that you've written for the movie, like a fan fiction, you're going to want to do more world building, especially if they're going to be a more prominent feature in your story.
Yes. Like we see that everything was pretty well planned when they were creating the first movie. They thought of everything.
Yeah, they really did. I mean, the different sizes of buildings to allow for mice from mice to giraffes all to enter the same building and not, be excluded. That's something to consider as well when you're talking about the possibility of having aquatic mammals.
Well, what were your favorite topics to investigate or focus on when you started to collect all this information?
Probably building the culture of aquatic mammals, because in the movie we see that a lot of animals have these human stereotypes applied to them. Obviously, rabbits in the real world don't think foxes are shifty. They just see them as predators, but they don't think they're shifty, like up to no good troublemakers. They just see them as a threat. So while in the movie we see that there's human stereotypes applied to everything. Lions are big, loud, kind of bracious. Foxes, they're sneaky, they're shifty, they're always up to something. Rabbits, they like carrots, or they're very farmerish. If a rabbit was a human, it would probably be a farmer. That sort of ideas.
But that's precisely what Zootopia, at least the first movie, talks about prejudice, about not sticking to the stereotypes of what you expect other mammals to be. So, what would you think will be the stereotype for dolphins?
Well, I think that their primary culture would definitely be built around intelligence and resourcefulness. Obviously, dolphins are some of the most intelligent creatures on the planet. They're basically number two in comparison to humans. And in Zootopia world, obviously everyone has human level of intelligence, but if you're upgrading, a fox to a human level of intelligence, it could stand to reason that when you have an already more intelligent creature, they could also gain a higher sort of intelligence, which means that aquatic mammals can also have maybe some more advanced technology, especially to further allow them to possibly be less restricted when they're coming on land and stuff like that. For example, my aquatic mammals, whenever they're in their stories, their clothing itself, it has 3 layers. You have an outside layer that just looks like regular clothing. You have a secondary layer that kind of acts as a barrier. And then the interior layer is actually a sort of damp, just a damp material that remains damp throughout the day. So even though it basically, keeps their skin hydrated so they can walk around freely and not have to worry about drying out while also not dripping wet everywhere.
If they were walking.
Yeah, if they would be walking. Obviously, if you're doing the more realistic kind of approach, they would be restrained to just water-specific areas, which at that point, you get into the kind of technology of like a movable water tank, kind of like, I don't know if there's any examples in media, head in a jar on wheels, like sort of thing. I don't know if there's really any examples I can think of that quite articulate what I'm saying, but if a dolphin did want to just be able to roam freely in a more realistic kind of approach, he would literally have to just be sat in a like movable aquarium with wheels that he can somehow control and move around. And then additionally, you'd have to have stuff that like speakers that he speaks into through the water and it comes out. So, because obviously you can't talk through glass. So you'd have to consider all of that sort of stuff when you're going into your realistic approach as well, which both approaches work. It's just how you make them work that's different.
If we want to incorporate more sea mammals, they have to be something similar like to Marsh Market, but that it's more connected with the actual city because we don't have, okay, they might be restricted because of only being able to be on water, but also we see other creatures that while they're not exactly that limited, but they are specific areas in this place that are built specifically for them. Like we have little rodentia that is specifically for little creatures, like the name says, little rodentia, for rodents. While they can also live in another part of the city, we know that in Tundra Town there's Mr. Big, but we also found Frou Frou that is hanging out on Little Rodentia. Like, there might be for one area, but they can adapt themselves to another. But I think there will
Yeah,
be some kind of. I think there are some mammals that live specifically in one part of the city, but they can also move to another one. Like, or like you said, like are semi-aquatic, so they can adapt in a way easier. Like we have the hippopotamus, that we know that they tend to be on water too, but also we see them sometimes walking around in the city.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking about that sort of thing, um, the obviously you have these areas around Zootopia, the boroughs or whatever you'd like, the districts, whatever you want to call them, that are specialized for certain types of mammals. And there's little restriction when it comes to certain things. Obviously, a hippo can't live in a little rodentia, but wherever the hippos live, a rodent could theoretically live there. So you just have to think about what's being restricted here and how to make it the best kind of deal for everyone, which is why most of anything that would be implemented for sort of inclusion's sake would probably be in the city square, the financial district where people go to work, and then they'd have their own sort of area, probably in the marshlands or at sort of a coastal dock area, because we do see Zootopia. I believe it. I don't know if it's bordering an ocean or if it's on a lake, whatever, but we do see waters and coastal areas and beaches, that sort of thing. I mean, even if you had your aquatic mammals living like right off the beach, just underwater, and then they took a tube to work or something in the city center, that's something that you'd have a viable option for.
Okay, now let me switch the question. How do you think this will work in the case of orcas or whales, considering they're much bigger than the dolphin?
So, orcas are dolphins themselves. A lot of
But
people don't realize that.
but they're much bigger. I mean,
They are much bigger. Orcas are not too big to the point of where I believe that it would cause them any issues to be on land. Whales, however, are another story. I mean, whales are absolutely massive. And I honestly have yet to really include too many whales in any of my stories, mostly because their pure size makes things difficult. No matter what iteration you kind of do, whether you say you have your more realistic one where they're flying around in water tanks on wheels, or you have these bipedal creatures, either way, whales are really going to be restricted to the water because they're simply too large to fit into Zootopia. I mean, the largest creatures in Zootopia are probably a lot like giraffes, elephants, that sort of thing, and we're talking multiple times that size. So to include them would really just be unrealistic in terms of building materials, time and effort spent, and it just wouldn't make sense to have a whale, like have a, and it wouldn't make sense to build a building with the thought that a whale might come through. That just make enough sense. And when you're talking bipedal as well, if you want to go a bipedal route with them, then their own weight would crush them on land, and that's what happens to beach whales. Whales only exist in the water because they're so large that the water supports them.
so of course we know that they wouldn't be living among the city, but do you think they will be coexisting in a way like somewhere far away from Zootopia?
That's absolutely a possibility, and especially if you have something like canals, if that is a viable option, you could definitely build canals, like say in the marshlands that are wide enough to allow for whales to go through, that sort of thing. But you wouldn't see a whale working in an office building in Zootopia. It just wouldn't be a possible thing, and that could be seen as some sort of prejudice or disclusion for whales, but it's just logical to not have that sort of difficulty. And I'm sure the whales themselves wouldn't be too like it wouldn't be an issue between anyone, because the whales obviously would understand that it just wouldn't be a functional relationship, and then obviously the people or the smaller mammals would understand that they're just simply too large to interact with in that sort of normal way. Now, say you had some mammals that maybe wanted to go underwater. You could go to a whale law firm, sure. That's different. Underwater, the whales can maybe build whatever they want to be built, or have built whatever they want built to fit their size, especially since you have so much more space to work with. I mean, Zootopia, it's a big city, but you only have so much space, whereas underwater, the whales have already been there, so likely there will already be structures there ready to accommodate them.
Yeah, I wanted to mention somewhere beyond the city, because we already know that there's more than just the city, because well, the story, the movie started with Judy being in Bunnyborough, that it's far away of Zootopia. You can get there by train, but also you can get there on the highway. It will take much longer, obviously, but we know that there's more than just the city. It's practically a main point where a lot of mammals can live together, no matter the ecosystem they live in, because there are different. We have obviously Sahara Square, we have Tundra Town, we have the Rainforest District. Like it is adapted for all kinds of mammals, of what ecosystem they're most they prefer, and everything they're accommodated with. But in this case with sea mammals, it's different because they need a much wider space so they can freely move. So it will make more sense that if they were in added in this universe, they will have their own section of, like, the ocean will be very far away of Zootopia, but in a way that's connected, because we see there is water surrounding the city. So there must be a way that that's it is connected to the ocean, and therefore there could be featuring more sea mammals and everything.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something to consider. Sea mammals would likely have their own oceanic cities. My personal design that I came up with when doing oceanic cities, you have these smaller cities that are just underwater. You just have an underwater city. It's sitting on the seafloor. It's made with materials that you find under the ocean, that sort of thing. It's completely accessible for aquatic mammals and that sort of stuff. But then for, obviously, to make a functioning sort of oceanic nation with a functioning economy, functioning government, and all that stuff, my design was to have tiered cities where you have basically a upper city and a lower city. The upper city is floating on top of the ocean. That allows for these aquatic mammals to interact with land mammals for trade purposes, legislation, diplomacy, all that sort of stuff. And then you have a lower part of the city that is mostly just for those aquatic mammals to kind of live in and obviously do whatever they want. So the upper city would be more working kind of area, offices, that sort of thing. And then the lower city would be more housing. And that's how I kind of designed my aquatic mammal cities. And then they're accessible by boat, plane, all that sort of stuff. And you can even do tourism with your land mammals coming to the upper cities, that sort of thing.
Okay, what do you consider be the most difficult thing to incorporate in this kind of about adding another type of animal in this universe?
Probably, honestly, the size. Dolphins are surprisingly large. They can grow up to 13 feet. Orcas even larger. So you're talking very, very, very large creatures walking around that don't have those kind of weirder proportions like elephants and giraffes. They would definitely be more sleek, or if you're going more of a realistic approach, they're just long. So you'd have to consider your sizes when you're implementing them into your creations or world. Which Zootopia does a pretty good job of that. There's not too much. They keep their sizes pretty well done, but yeah, dolphins are surprisingly large, and it's something that I run into whenever I'm writing my stories. Like, you have to realize just how large they can be as creatures, especially if you're going to make them bipedal. You have to incorporate that height into them. I mean, you're not going to have a 5 foot tall dolphin. You're going to have a 6 foot, 7 foot, 8 foot tall dolphin that's walking around and doing all this stuff, or when you're having your more realistic approach, you have to think about, is this 7 foot long essentially tube going to be able to fit into wherever it needs to go, or again, are they going to be restrained to just staying in sort of canals and that sort of thing, and accessing any sort of office and work that way?
How much time has it taken you to fully investigate all of these details to create your stories and everything?
um well, I started writing these kind of fan fictions, gosh, how long was that ago? 5+ years ago. um Initially, when I started off, I did just kind of slap them in and just kind of forgot about it. But as I got more into world building, I realized I wanted to have a fully fledged out explanation of why these animals exist the way that they do. So I would say maybe about a year or two I spent just kind of fleshing out different ideas, kind of thinking about how things could work and that sort of thing. And, obviously I'm not a Bible, there's tons of other ideas that you can use to express your aquatic mammals in your stories and that sort of thing. But this is just my personal preference and what I, in my head, feel that makes the most sense when it comes to, okay, this makes sense of how they actually are existing in this world.
All right, all right. Because it definitely takes a long time. Like we know how much time it took for the Disney team to really produce everything that we see in the movie. How many years they took to really consider all the details. Like we see the sizes, like you just mentioned about how large these creatures can they be, so we can mix them together and it will not look awkward. Like it will just go fluently, like it is you see it, it is as you see it, like very natural. You can accept the fact. While you're not that familiar perhaps with the topic, but how much different do you think it is to include birds also in this universe?
That's a really good question, because obviously it's never said in the movie. You don't really even see any birds, if I recall. Like, can you recall at any point in the movie where we see birds even just flying in the air or anything like that?
No.
Yeah, so if you're talking about making your birds anthropomorphic, sentient, all that sort of stuff, it honestly kind of creates a problem. Me personally, I would not suggest trying to implement anthropomorphic birds into your Zootopia stories, because birds would fit so much better filling a role of essentially filling the role of a number of animals that we have, that we as humans use. For example, obviously it's never really shown in the movie, but there's predators, and those predators have to eat some sort of meat, protein, that sort of thing. They can't just survive off veggies their whole lives. So, for example, chickens would be a great way to provide these predators with meat in a way that wouldn't make prey, obviously, either killing prey animals, or that sort of thing. Obviously, they might still be like, I don't want to see you eat a chicken, but it's something that would likely be provided to them just because they do need to have that meat. Same thing with fish, which, yeah, this is a headcanon for me, of course, but fish and chicken are probably the biggest food items for predators to buy and to eat, because obviously they can't eat prey animals.
Well, there has been preference that they can eat insects, bugs.
Yeah, bugs as well, yeah. But that, I think that's the more canon explanation for how they get their protein, which is a viable explanation. But if you were interested to introduce birds into your fic, that's how I would introduce them. If you introduce them anthropomorphically, it's really not too much of a big change. I mean, a lot of birds, they have kind of a upright kind of standing posture. So if you just want to add some hands or just appendages onto the end of their wings, I mean, that kind of really just makes them work. You don't really have to do too much with them. If you make them sentient, and they might be able to fly around. They might also not be able to. It depends on how you just kind of work through it, how their bones, because obviously birds' bones are very light, and that's what kind of allows them to fly. And why humans can't fly. We have much more denser bones, and most animals have much more denser bones. So when you're talking about birds, you just kind of have to consider what role you want them to fill. For me, the role that I like them to fill is as farm animals, and it really works great as well because larger birds like ostriches, emus, that sort of thing, they work. They can work well to replace horses and oxen and that sort of thing. Obviously not for maybe like an elephant, but a fox can absolutely ride an ostrich just like a horse, and that paves way for lots of fun kind of ideas to work with as well. Like in my Wild West fic, my Western fic, I use birds as replacing horses and that sort of thing. And it, you know, if you have a story with something to do with ranching, that sort of thing, birds can really do a good job of filling that role.
Well, for what we know so far, or what we have seen, at least regarding the teaser trailer, obviously there's no references so far to birds. So far, we only have reptiles, and what little we saw on the Marsh Market with the semi-aquatic mammals, the walrus and well, we have seen the hippo before and everything, the otter, that they also can move themselves on water and everything. But yes, to incorporate in this case birds or sea mammals in general, it's much more complex than what it appears to be. So they really had to be careful if they really are going to be including them in either in the sequel or any future short film or whatever they come up with. Like I said, it has to appear natural. Like you see it, like, oh, it works that way. Then that's a pretty creative concept they made here, so it can work out.
Yeah, they'll likely do it in whatever way feels most natural. And obviously my preferred method probably wouldn't be the one that they would go with, just because of, I will admit, it does look a little weird and awkward. But obviously they wouldn't go with that other method that we looked at earlier with the DreamWorks dolphins from All Hail King Julian, because that also looks weird and awkward. So their best bet would probably go for a more realistic approach, almost kind of like Finding Nemo, where you have them they keep their torpedo kind of style bodies, and they just kind of swim through tubes, and that's how they kind of go throughout the city and interact with people.
Yes, because they had to adapt. They will find a way because in regarding size or height, we see that when we Judy first arrives on Zootopia, like there are tubes for the little rodents, but also for bigger mammals, and also we have this little I think it was a juice stand where I think it was a small rodent or another mammal that was giving handing out a drink on a kind of like um I don't know how it's called. It's kind of like an elevator, and it will send it up all the way to a giraffe because the giraffe is very tall. So how they can grab it if the stall is too low? So they can't. Preferably they can crouch to take it, but it works. It looks cool that they thought that, well, for the taller mammals that we can do this, incorporate this kind of system so they can also grab their products, whatever they are buying.
Yeah, that absolutely makes it easier, and I'm sure Disney will come up with very creative ways to implement. And if they do ever implement it, I'm sure they'll come up with some very creative ways to implement them and have them be allowed to be included with everybody else. Because obviously, the whole point of the movie is include everybody. Don't exclude anybody for any other reasons that they can't control. So obviously, they would want to do their best to include things like aquatic mammals and allow them to function in what is probably a land mammal based society.
Yes, but of course there are certain lots of activities that sea mammals wouldn't be able to do in any circumstances.
Yeah, that's obviously true. Like, you're not going to see a dolphin playing tennis. Obviously, there's also a lot of fun things that they could implement that land mammals might not be able to do. And especially when it comes to things like entertainment, we humans already go to see dolphins, orcas, and sea animals as entertainment. So for those aquatic mammals that live maybe near cities, I have a feeling that they would be very inclined to sort of entertainment jobs where they perform water aerobic tricks, that sort of thing, or even water sports masters, because dolphins have been known to play with toys in the water. They play games with each other, that sort of thing. So moving that over to a more anthropomorphized world, it's totally understandable that, at the edge of Zootopia or far away from Zootopia, and there might be a water stadium or something like that where, teams of dolphins come and play some sort of game, competing against each other in the water.
Yes. Now that I think about it, how will that work with penguins?
Penguins. Well, penguins being birds. If you have anthropomorphized birds, penguins would probably be in a similar sort of boat. Um, Penguins would probably be very popular as entertainers, that sort of thing. Playing games with each other, that sort of thing, and competing with each other.
But I mean, they could incorporate in the Zootopia universe way easier because they have fins,
Yeah,
but they also have paw. Well, I wouldn't call it paws, but yeah, they can walk.
yeah, they can. Most birds can walk.
But I mean, they have fins because they don't have feathers.
Yeah, penguins would probably kind of be I guess they're really a mix of all three: land animals, birds, and aquatic animals. And DreamWorks obviously has their penguins. So yeah, DreamWorks has their penguins, which work pretty well as anthropomorphized penguins. They're upright standing. They speak. They have fins that can grab onto things. Kind of they curl to grab onto them. If it were to be implemented, which, speaking again, I just get this feeling that Disney wouldn't go for any penguins because of DreamWorks penguins. They would kind of just stay away from that kind of idea. But if they were to implement it, I have a feeling they would either try to do something similar to what DreamWorks has done and just have them kind of be like these anthropomorphized, easy penguins that they just kind of fit in. They don't. It doesn't take too much to explain them. You're just like, oh yeah, that's how a penguin would probably move if it was more anthropomorphized.
Yeah, like you said, like it will be difficult to incorporate them because we are already associate the penguins from Madagascar from DreamWorks, but they can maybe somehow work it out if they ever decided to add penguins in Zootopia, it will be interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. Well, I guess we'll just have to see and wait and see what Disney decides to do with their future IPs regarding Zootopia. There's plenty of comics coming out, and maybe we'll get new shows, new movies, and we'll keep exploring and exploring this world of animals. And yeah, it just really all comes down to how much Disney decides to milk this franchise.
Okay then. So to close this episode, what is your favorite thing regarding this topic?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I don't know if I have quite a favorite thing about the topic. I would say that the topic itself is my favorite thing about Zootopia in general, trying to fit mammals that may not have been shown in the movie, kind of making them fit into this world that we've been presented with, but obviously we don't know all the details about. Like there's stuff out there in this world that we have no clue about, and that's being shown by this second movie, revealing to us reptiles and more aquatic sea creatures. So I have just the concept of talking about introducing and making animals that we don't know how they fit, talking about how they could fit. That's honestly my favorite thing.
You truly enjoyed like really come up with all these different possibilities and ideas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love world building. I love lore. That's all that sort of thing, and I love making things fit and connect together and making them make sense. That sort of thing.
Do you think will Disney will do something entirely differently from what you have come up with, or like you said, to go with the approach that you see that it's the most possible to occur?
It's completely a possibility. I mean, they could. I mean, I personally can't think of anything that they would come up with, but they could literally come up with something that I'm like, I'd never in a million years would have thought to ever implement that. But I do believe that if they were going to implement sea creatures, they would probably do it in a more realistic Finding Nemo kind of integrated fashion, where they keep their realistic bodies and they just kind of travel through different technological means, tubes, rolling tanks, that sort of thing.
Well then. And how excited are you for Zootopia 2?
Very excited. I do hope that we see at least one dolphin. I mean, obviously there's that tattoo, but that's not enough for me.
Well, let's see. Let's see if we get to see it eventually. Well, any last words before we finish?
No, I think I'm glad that I was able to come on here and kind of speak my piece and talk about one of my favorite topics regarding this, one of my favorite movies.
All right. Well, thank you for joining the podcast in this episode. It was really interesting, all this discussion about world building. Like, for us who are listening to the podcast, remember that it is difficult to come up with all of these ideas because there's a lot of details to take into consideration. Like, we think at first hand that it's easy, but it's not really that easy. Really had to consider everything that it's necessary, like it was just discussed right now with dolphins about like I said, the culture, economy, politics, like there's or what we call the sizes, all those things had to be taken into account for in any kind of universe or something different that you're coming up with. You really have to be careful whenever you are building your stories. And well, also remember to, as I said in the beginning, check out our website, Zootopia News Network, with all the latest news about Zootopia. Also, to continue support us, remember to check out our Patreon. And also don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast here on YouTube. And also remember to check us out on Spotify. And once again, thank you, Dolphins, for joining in this episode.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And thank you, everybody, for being in this episode of It's Called a Podcast with Heart. Boom!